Hello, I'm Ollie and this is Criminolly, where I talk about crime, pulp, horror, that kind of thing. Today, my 10 favourite authors right now. So this has ended up being a bit of a weird list. This is my 10 favourite authors today. The 10 authors who I'm most excited to read at the moment. It's not my 10 favourite authors of all time. It's not my 10 favourite current authors. It's kind of a mix of the two. So you've got two authors on here who are long time favourites of mine. You've got some authors who are very new authors who I've discovered recently. You've got some authors who are, have been writing for a long time, but who I've only discovered recently. But these are all authors who I'm really excited to read books by. There's at least one author on here who's only written 2 books. I've read both of those books and I'm excited to read them again. So it really is, as I say, a bit of a weird list, but I thought it would be interesting to talk about. So let me get on with it and tell you who they are. So the first one is one who probably won't be a surprise to anyone. In fact, the first 2 probably won't be a surprise to anyone. So these are my 2 favourite authors of all time. So the first one is Stephen King. So I love Stephen King. I've loved Stephen King for decades. I think he's a fantastic writer. I haven't quite yet exhausted his back catalogue. So clearly he is still writing. He's still publishing at least 1 book a year, which is fantastic. And I am keeping up with those. I think there are 4 or 5 books from his back catalogue that I haven't read yet, that I'm gradually working my way through. But I pretty much always have a good time with a Stephen King book. And there are loads of Stephen King books that I would like to reread at some point. So he's definitely still an author I'm really excited to read. The second one is Ed McBain, or Evan Hunter as he was also known. So Evan Hunter was his legal name. Ed McBain was one of the many pen names that he wrote under, but the one that he was most successful with. So he wrote tons of books as Ed McBain. I think, I did tally this up a little while ago, there are still dozens of books by Ed McBain / Evan Hunter that I haven't read. He wrote well over 100 novels, and I've read more than half of them. I've read, I think, 60 or 70 of them, but there are still a lot for me to get through. He's dead. He died in the early 2000s, so he's definitely not publishing anything new. But as I said, there's still a load of stuff in his back catalogue, and I always have a good time with his books. And he wrote, whilst he mostly wrote crime fiction, he did write a variety of other stuff. So particularly as Evan Hunter, he wrote some stuff you would probably label like general fiction. He wrote at least 1 Western, which I read recently and quite enjoyed. So he wrote a variety of different things, but again, just a really good popular author like Stephen King. So writes that kind of unpretentious fiction that I really enjoy. Next up then is a newer author, a crime writer. I've read all of his novels so far and loved every one of them. Can't wait to see what he reads next. That author is S.A. Cosby. So S.A. Cosby is someone who I think really interestingly writes different types of crime fiction. So a lot of crime writers tend to stick to one particular style of crime. Cosby writes all different sorts of things. So he's written a book about a getaway driver, Blacktop Wasteland, which was great. He's written a serial killer novel, which was fantastic, All the Sinners Bleed. So he writes a variety of different things. Apparently he's working at the moment on a Godfather style crime epic. So I'm really looking forward to reading that when it comes out. The next one is the only science fiction writer on the list. So all of the other writers are basically crime or horror. So the science fiction writer is Becky Chambers. Again, I've read everything Becky Chambers. I think I've read everything Becky Chambers has published to date, and I've enjoyed all of it. So she writes kind of hopeful, inclusive science fiction that just, like, for me as a reader, I just find really satisfying. Her books tend to be reasonably short, so they're not like huge sci-fi tomes like some science fiction writers like to turn out. Her books tend to be quite slim, quite focused, and just really kind of cosy and enjoyable. There's just something about her writing I really enjoy, and really looking forward to reading whatever she puts out next. Next up then is Patricia Highsmith. So I've been reading, as people who watch the channel will know, Patricia Highsmith since the beginning of last year. Been gradually working my way through her back catalogue. So I'm currently reading her final novel. There are some short story collections by her I haven't read yet. I've also got her diaries, which I'd like to read at some point. But she's still someone who whenever I pick up a new book by her that I haven't read yet, I get excited. Again, she's no longer with us, sadly, but there is enough stuff in her back catalogue to keep me going. I think I've still got at least half a dozen books by her I haven't read in terms of like short stories and non-fiction, but I'm also really looking forward to rereading some of the books by her that I've already read. I'm not a huge rereader, but there's something about Highsmith's work, particularly the kind of subtlety of it and the ambiguity of a lot of her books. So she wrote kind of crime thriller books where a lot of the tension comes from not really knowing what's going on, and it's a very difficult thing to pull off, but Highsmith typically does it brilliantly. So because of that ambiguity, I'm looking forward to rereading at least some of the books by her that I've already read. Next up is another horror author, and one who's been publishing for a while, albeit I've only started reading his books recently. That is Adam Nevill. So I've read 3 of his books so far. My favourite, I think, was the most recent one, All the Fiends of Hell, which I thought was fantastic, but I've enjoyed the other 2 books I've read by him too. Really looking forward to working my way through his back catalogue. A bit like Patricia Highsmith, there's kind of an ambiguity sometimes to his work. You sometimes feel like you don't quite know what's going on, and the central characters definitely don't quite know what's going on, and he builds a real kind of tension and terror through that. So an author I'm enjoying very much and looking forward to reading more by. Next we have another horror author, a very new horror author, Nat Cassidy. So I recently reviewed his novella Rest Stop on the channel, which I thought was phenomenal. I've also read his book Mary, which I thought was excellent. I have his second novel Nestlings, which I haven't managed to read yet, and he seems to be writing and publishing new stuff at a decent rate. I know he's got a new novel coming out soon. So yeah, continue to really enjoy his work, and I'm looking forward to reading everything else he puts out. Next up is a crime writer, Raymond. So I've read his Factory series, which I've talked about on the channel, which I thought was absolutely phenomenal. The darkest, most disturbing crime fiction I've ever read, I think. A really, really interesting writer. He did write a load of standalone novels as well. I've got a couple of them, so I'm going to be gradually working my way through those. Sadly, like some of the other authors I've talked about, he's no longer with us. So the back catalogue for me is finite, but really looking forward to reading more of his stuff. Next we have the author who's only written 2 books, so still alive but has only published 2 novels, those being A Simple Plan and The Ruins. So the author is Scott Smith. I really hope Scott Smith writes some more books. I think he's a screenwriter now. I think he said he doesn't intend to publish any more fiction, but I'd love it if he did, because I think he is absolutely phenomenal. So I read A Simple Plan and The Ruins. I read both of them when they first came out. Really enjoyed both of them at the time. I reread A Simple Plan recently, within the last year or so, and it was even better than I remembered. It's a phenomenal thriller, so much so that I want to read it again. I think I'm probably going to read it again next year, and I definitely need to reread The Ruins as well. So The Ruins, more of a horror novel, but both of them are absolutely fantastic. So even though he's only written 2 books, he's someone who I am really excited to keep rereading those books. I just think there's something about his writing that really, really appeals to me. And it's something to do with the way he constructs his plots. So I watched a video the other day. This is a random aside. I watched a video the other day by the creators of South Park where they talked about how to tell a story. And the way to tell a story is not to say this thing happened and then this thing happened and then this thing happened. It's to say this thing happened and so this thing happened, and because this thing happened, this other thing happened. So it's to string together the events of your story with cause and effect, basically. Scott Smith does that fantastically. As the plots of his books develop, you don't quite know where they're going to go, but as they progress, it always makes sense. It always makes sense why things escalate in the way that they do. I really think he's a great writer, and more people should read him. And more people should read him so that he's forced to publish more books. So the final author is another horror author, Alison Rumfitt. So Alison Rumfitt has only published 3 books so far. I've read 2 of them. So she's published 2 horror novels, Tell Me I'm Worthless and Brainworms, and she's also more recently published a Doctor Who novel, which I've got but I haven't read yet. Tell Me I'm Worthless I just thought was stunningly good. Quite experimental in its writing at times. Very political, but just brilliantly, brilliantly done. Brainworms I didn't like quite as much, but I still enjoyed. The Doctor Who one, as I said, I haven't read that yet, but looking forward to it. But I think she's a really interesting new voice in horror, and really looking forward to reading whatever new horror she puts out. So yes, that was my slightly disjointed list of my 10 favourite authors right now. Do let me know in the comments if I've mentioned any of your favourites here. And as always, thanks very much for watching. Hope you're safe and well out there. Hope you're reading good stuff. And I'll speak to you again very soon. Cheerio.